Welcome, Buff fans. We got a special podcast for you. As we teased earlier this week, Matt Smith and I are here. We want to do a little NFL draft preview because, Matt, as I wrote today and we talked about the other day, for the first time in quite a while, Buff fans actually have a reason to be interested in this draft
Seriously.
because, you know, do you remember? I'll ask you if I'm going to test your Buffs knowledge and I'm putting you on the spot. The last Buff
Okay.
drafted.
Drafted. Hold on. I actually think I know it
And
because
while
there's
while you're
only
thinking, I will tell you the fact that you have to think this hard is a reason why we're asking this because it's been a while.
yeah. I want to say I'll tell you this, the last buff that I knew of that was still in the league from the forgotten era or whatever, like the pre-prime like few years between McIntyre and
Yeah,
Prime were was Will Sherman, and he was in a camp with the Broncos, and I think he's still in the league. Is that who it was?
it was Will Sherman.
Nah,
There you
let's
go.
go.
So nice job. Sixth round pick in
Yeah,
2021
yeah,
by the New England Patriots.
yeah.
CU's media guide likes to claim a few others that have been drafted since then that left and were drafted by other teams, but nobody acknowledges that but CU. So I'm not going to acknowledge that those guys were buffs being drafted, and CU can get mad at me, but I don't acknowledge that they were buffs because they didn't get drafted as
Well,
buffs.
they
So
were buffs, but they weren't drafted as buffs.
correct. And so
Yeah,
therefore
yeah.
I don't think you can claim them in your media guide. So
No,
anyway,
no, no.
the last buff, the last player that they said so and so from Colorado
Right.
was Will Sherman, and
Yeah.
it hasn't been great for a number of years, right? And I'll give you another trivia question before we really get into it.
Hold on. What round was that in?
It was in the sixth.
It was in the sixth. Did anybody
Yeah,
even announce that, or did it just pop up on the screen in
sure.
the
Somebody
sixth
announced
round?
it. That sixth round is kind of when they have like fans announcing it and things
Oh,
like
yeah,
that,
that's
right?
right.
On
Yeah,
the
that's
Saturday
right.
morning stuff. So, um, 2011, there was two first round draft picks. Nate Solder, Jimmy Smith.
Jimmy Smith. Yeah.
Okay. Since then, who is the highest buff drafted?
Uh, P. Rich, or was it
Close.
Visca?
It was Visca.
It was Visca because I mean,
Visca,
they weren't that far apart.
they weren't that far apart. Visca was the 42nd pick. P. Rich was the 45th pick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was right
So,
there. Most
yeah.
people forget. Most people forget about P. Rich. P. Rich was nasty.
Yeah. And it
He was
would have
nasty.
been, I think it would have been Cheeto Bay had he not, there was an injury or something.
Yeah,
Wasn't he come off an injury?
yeah.
Um,
Out of the Alamo Bowl.
yeah, he was, yeah. He was widely projected as a first round pick and then slipped, went late in the second round. So, anyway, let's get into it because we want to talk about the buffs that are going to be drafted this year rather than talking about some of those others in the past. But um, the big names, right? We know of two that are going to be drafted, and then we're going to talk about some others that we think might be. But the first one that's going to be drafted is Travis, but we want to start with Shedeur because that is the one that everybody's talking about. I mean, he's the hot name that everybody's talking about leading up to this draft. As we're doing this, we're 25 hours away from the start of the draft, Matt, and Shedeur Sanders is the name that everybody's talking about today. And
They are.
yeah, and you and I tweeted about it today. I mean, just what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
Shedeur Sanders 25 hours away from the draft?
yeah. I was. I went on a bit of a rampage. I officially hit my limit. You and I have been talking, and even mid-season, I think I brought it up in like October. Just batten down the hatches when we get to draft season because
Mhm.
the takes will be flying. It's gotten to a level that I didn't even think, only because it's coming from NFL sources, like actual coaches and teams. I never thought we'd get to a situation where he was going to slip like that.
Right.
Allegedly, in the
Yeah, yeah.
narrative. I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking to a person who since 2023 was on the radio saying, Broncos, don't worry about your guy. He's in your backyard. I mean, I was on major market radio saying tank for Shedeur before
Yeah.
they went with Bo Nix. That's how
Yeah.
much of a believer I am in Shedeur Sanders. I just feel like I probably need to set the
Yeah.
frame of reference here because I believe in this young man wholeheartedly. And my feelings on him have not changed. I'm just incredibly disappointed by the discourse. And it also reminds me of something you and I talked about the other day, maybe a podcast ago, a couple ago, where I brought up the concept that he's like the next Caitlin Clark. His name sparks so much controversy. It's quite remarkable. And as a result, if you didn't think he was already going to have eyes on him coming into the league
Yeah.
after all of this and after this summer, the price of poker has only gone up. So quite frankly, I can't believe we're here. Um, it has surprised me, Brian, that there are so many NFL scouts and what appear to be coaches who fail to understand the nuance of what Shedeur Sanders had to deal with at Colorado.
Yeah.
No one else had to deal with that offensive line. They could not run the football slash would not run the football. Part of that was his decision as well, but it was more as a result of them just being completely below average at every part of that, right? They
Yeah.
didn't have that in their bag. And so his decision, 9 out of 10 times, was better to pull it. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Maybe it would have
Yeah.
helped them in some situations, but even if they really force fed it, I don't think it would have gotten much better. You know what I mean? You can only run
Yeah.
into a brick wall so many times. So, considering the obstacles that he had to overcome that his peers just quite frankly did not at all, and
Mhm.
even trying to make a comparison in that regard is a fool's errand. And I'll say this, having been on the field this year at every away game and certainly at the end of, every home game and in big moments, I'm witness to it. I'm here to
Mhm.
testify to tell you that he has what it. I've seen it with my own eyes on field level, stuff that will translate. I've covered the NFL for a while, so have you. I've been in
Yeah.
training camps. This kid has it, man. We've seen it time after time after time. And to be honest, I think that a lot of NFL teams are fearful that he won't blindly capitulate to what they want to do. And that's just not how the NFL works, right? Most guys come in just grateful to be given the opportunity. Whereas, look, he is an extremely accomplished athlete to this point. Not that there haven't been others in the past. We really haven't seen anybody come in with their own financial independence like he's coming in with, because I would imagine that he's the most independently wealthy NFL prospect probably of all time. I mean, just let's just put that out there, number one. So the
Yeah.
money isn't like he's not just tripping over his feet to sign his
Yeah.
contract, right?
Right.
Whereas in the past, a lot of guys would have been. And he's a young black man who's very confident and he's very successful. And he has the most unbelievable resources at his fingertips in Hall of Famers everywhere. He's been mentored by Tom Brady. That's intimidating. Okay, it is. And
Mhm.
especially if you already have preconceived notions, which the latest anonymous source, he talked about the interview, but none of his comments were about the interview other than it was the worst one he'd ever been in, which, I think Kyle Brandt said it best, was like, hey, maybe you set the atmosphere of it being critical, and Shador
Right.
picked up on it, and he was right. Because
Yeah.
right afterwards, you ran and anonymously, didn't want to put your name on it, but you did tell somebody. And so I laugh at all that. I think that I still hold the belief that I will be very surprised if he falls out of the top 10 just knowing the NFL. But what's very clear is there are many NFL teams that couldn't handle him, that aren't
Yeah.
ready for that. That has become apparent. And I thought there would be more because of the quarterback position and how desperate you are. Like, let's just look at the top 10. Can we just look at the top 10 for a second? Do the Titans need a quarterback? Yes. Okay, so they're taking Cam Ward, right? That's what we all, believe to be true. Number two, Cleveland. Do they need a quarterback? Yes.
Mhm.
You have a golden opportunity to take one right here. Okay. They're not allegedly going to. The Giants, they need a quarterback. You're not going to take one? Okay. Raiders, they just brought in Geno Smith. How about the Jets? You just signed Justin Fields. He's going to be your starter. That's your only plan. Do
Yeah.
they need a quarterback? I would say yes. How about the Saints? Derek Carr. They don't know if he's going to be out for the entire year. So what we're looking at, Brian, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams in the top 10 that need a quarterback.
Yeah.
I am going to be very surprised if we make it through all those 5 and he's not off the board. I will.
Yeah. I would too. Other than it depends on how much people read into the quote character stuff, which I know you and I both think is bogus, but like, I think that he's an interesting case study, and I've seen this point made, and I think it's a good point that he's one of the most unique prospects ever because not only who he is, but like who his father is, and he's coming in with a father who was not only a Pro Football Hall of Famer, but is very much in the limelight and an outspoken individual himself. Um, and we've never seen this before. I mean, you've had the Mannings come in and their father played in the NFL and things like that, but Archie was not the personality that Deion Sanders is, and I've seen a point. I think it was Stephen A. Smith actually said, that he thinks there's teams that probably worry about having to deal with Deion Sanders, and I can maybe understand that, but I'm also of the belief, and maybe I'm wrong, Matt, but I'm of the belief that I don't think you're gonna have to deal with Dion that much. Dion's got a job. I mean, Dion's gonna be working here in Boulder, and how much you really gonna have to deal with Deion Sanders when he's with the Colorado Buffaloes all week, and then he's gonna get in his private jet, fly to Shedeur's game on Sunday, and then head home. So um, there was a. I know it's probably different, but there was those concerns about LeVar Ball when his sons came into the league, right? How often have you heard about LeVar Ball getting involved with those boys since they've been in the NBA? You follow closer than I have. I'm asking you.
I mean, enough, but not to the point where he's, telling the coach that they need to, LaMelo needs to play more. It became easier for him because,
It was sort of
Lonzo got hurt and
yeah.
LiAngelo flamed out.
What I
So,
remember is, it was sort of a thing that first year, Lonzo's first year with the Lakers, but I've never really heard a whole lot of it. And you're right, Lonzo got hurt, but like, you don't hear about it as much. And so I just think Shedeur is so mature and he's so NFL ready that I don't understand why people look at him and say he's got all these flaws. And it's amazing to me now. I texted you earlier today. So I just read one mock draft on Yahoo that they've got three quarterbacks going in the first round, and not one of them is Shedeur. Like, really? You got Jackson Dart going to the Saints and Jalen Milroe going to the Steelers at 21, and Shedeur not going at all. All of a sudden, this is what I hate about the NFL draft process is all of a sudden you got guys who have never once been talked about as a first round pick that are now going to go ahead of Shedeur Sanders, who has always been talked about as a first round pick. I just don't buy it.
no. And we're talking about an individual that possesses every last quality you could possibly want. If
Yeah.
Confidence or overconfidence is intimidating to you, don't
Yeah.
take him.
Right.
You're not equipped to handle him. And if
Yeah.
that's the case, look, Cleveland's a bad franchise. They've been a bad franchise for a very long time. Their
Yeah.
owner is notorious for making bad decisions. So would it surprise me if we got there and they didn't take either Travis or Shedeur? No, it would not
Yeah.
surprise me. Abdul Carter's on the board, and people are still in love with him, despite him having multiple injuries heading into this summer. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't able to participate in the combine because of a shoulder injury, and it was reported that he's going to need foot surgery. So if you're so intimidated by it, then stay away. Now I don't think they are. I think a lot of that is talk because when it comes down to it, Travis will be there. And look, if you have the second overall pick and you just so happen to have a chance to draft a generational talent, then it's kind of like found gold anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in most other years, a guy like that probably goes number one overall if we're talking about a generational talent. But
Yeah.
because of how important quarterback is, especially in today's day and age, Cam Ward is going to probably be that guy, right? So I am look, we have talked about Shedeur for a very long time, and if you followed me at all, you know how much I believe in him. I believe he will be a better pro than he is a college quarterback because, quite frankly, he'll be surrounded with better players. And I
Yeah.
think that he'll take all of the coaching that he's received and then apply it to an NFL franchise, and he will become an instant leader of that team. It
Right.
will be impossible to deny that. He has an aura about him when he walks into a room, and that will be instantly respected in the NFL. Instantly. And
Yeah.
I also want to say one other thing. Like, God help all these other teams if for some reason he slides to where people are saying he might to 21 to the Steelers. They'll be right around playoffs this year, if not in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, with George Pickens and DK Metcalf, they have to replace Najee Harris, which, I mean, running back in the draft, they're a dime a dozen. I'm sure that they can target that or go on the street. There's a bunch of different guys. That's kind of how that position works. It's expendable now.
Yeah.
So you've got that defense with TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick and Mike Tomlin, who I think, for many reasons, would be a very good coach for Shedeur
Yeah.
because he lets his players be who they are and have the room to do that as long as they handle their business. And I think Mike Tomlin wouldn't think twice about the person that Shedeur is or how confident Shedeur is. As Pat Shermer said to us, and honestly, as far as all this other talk goes, because I do believe, Brian, and this is my personal opinion, there are heavy racial undertones to this discussion. And I think that's kind of impossible to ignore once we really dive into this. However, what Pat Shermer said to us about confidence specifically, look, it's December. The wind is howling. It's third and forever, and you need it. Who do you want? A guy who says, "Give me the ball, I'm gonna make this throw," or a guy who's gonna be shaking in his boots
Right.
because he's not overconfident?
Right.
Like that's what playing
Hmm.
quarterback in the NFL is. It is quite literally all on your shoulders. It is the
Yeah.
most important position in all of sports. So I chuckle at the people who think that he wouldn't be able to handle that. He will be able to handle everything that's thrown his way. And I truly believe that whoever passes on him, if you need a quarterback, will, first of all, that is a decision that loses you your job. That's number one,
Well,
right?
especially
And number,
especially if you're the Browns and you let him go to the Steelers in your own division.
yeah. Yeah. No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And so here's a couple things I just want to say. Like, I don't believe the Jets are going to roll into the season with just Justin Fields. I don't. They'll find somebody else. Maybe they want to give him a go and
Mhm.
really make that. But to not have somebody else at least coming up, that seems kind of silly to me. And really, how many times are you going to take a quarterback now on their third team and then build everything around him? That doesn't make any sense either. Now, the Jets are a bad franchise, and I could see them doing that.
Yeah.
However, the Saints are in the same boat. Like, do I think they're going to go into the season? Mickey Loomis, their general manager today, just said that they're not sure what the story is with Derek Carr's injury. How is that possible?
Yeah.
I know that there have been significant I guess a significant fallout between him and the franchise is what it sounds like from everything I'm reading. But how is that possible? Like on the eve of the draft.
Hmm.
So unless he's lying, which what's the benefit of that at
Yeah.
all? I
Right.
don't understand. They're not going to go into the season with just Spencer Rattler. So
Yeah.
again, I go back to, and not to mention, there are teams outside the top 10 that I believe would like to get into the top 10 to have that type of an opportunity. We see it every single year. I mean, there were 6 quarterbacks taking the first 12 picks. If there is just last year, if there is just one this year, I would be stunned. And quite frankly, there's a reason why perennially teams like Cleveland, the Jets, the Giants, that's why they're always picking at the top of the draft because in professional sports, you've got to have the triumvirate. You've got to have owner, you got to have front office, and you got to have head coach. And they all got to be working with each other with a healthy relationship. And a lot of those franchises that I just named don't. So
Yeah.
even if they pass on him, look, I'm not going to be too disappointed because that'll mean that he doesn't instantly have to go into a dysfunctional situation. Now, that being said, he's done it twice and they've crushed it. So I think he
Yeah.
can do it, but it's going to be a different road than it would be, let's say, in a New Orleans or a Pittsburgh, in my opinion. Even though New Orleans, they've got some cap hell because of what Sean Payton did to try and continue competing at the latter stage of Drew Brees' career, which should maybe be a little tricky up front. They still have weapons, so and a wide open division. So
Right.
we'll see what happens with Shedeur specifically. I don't have a feel for it. I don't. I was laughing because I was looking at the odds, the betting odds for what team he might end up with. Like, what team do I see on here that could potentially make a move that nobody's talking about? I thought about the 49ers. Like Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, do they really want to pay Brock Purdy? Do they really want to pay him that kind of money? Or you want to try and flip Purdy, or at least, you can let the clock run out on Purdy if you want to, if you draft Shador. Like, you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
can do
Hmm.
that. So we'll see how it plays out. But it should make for entertaining television and definitely very stressful television.
Yeah. And it is interesting because I mean this whole process started. I mean, if you go back to last season, that Coach Prime was talking about these guys are 1-2, and
They should be.
I don't think a lot of people. You're gonna have some that push back, but there was a lot of people that you hear that and say, yeah, they really could, and now you get to the point that as it's gone along, well, maybe 3 to the Giants, and then what if he slips to 6 of the Raiders, and then it's become Saints at 9. I heard Adam Schefter today say that he does not believe that he'll go to the Saints. That he doesn't think the Saints like him from everything he's talked about to people he's talked to, and you've got like the top draft analysts, Schefter, Todd McShay, guys like that, now saying that they could see him potentially falling to the second round, which is insane to me. Schefter, he said if he had $1, he would bet on Shedeur going to Pittsburgh at 21, but he also pointed out that you never know what can happen, and because frankly, there's, as you mentioned, the Saints at 9, really 10 to 20. There's no team there you look at and say, yeah, they need a quarterback, but nobody would have thought that about Atlanta last year, right? When they took
Yeah.
Michael Penix. And so there could be that team, like you said, the 49ers or somebody like that, do they trade up and say, you know what, we want to get this guy now, so we'll see. Yeah. I'm with you though. I'm a full believer in Shedeur Sanders. I think he's going to be a better pro than a college player. And you mentioned what Pat Shermer said. With all the elements against you, things like that, who do you want to make the play? And as you were saying that, I instantly thought of the Baylor game.
Of course.
And it's like, that's an easy one to go to, but like, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
You're down, you're in desperation mode, it's raining. And what does he do? He throws a dime to Will Shepherd, who drops it inside the 5 yard line. And so now you're down to your absolute very last chance. And he rolls to his left and throws a dime again, a 50-yard dime off balance to LeJontay Wester to tie the game and send it in overtime. And, this is a guy that I think back to the CSU game. And people can argue, hey, maybe you shouldn't have been in those situations. Whatever, you were. CSU game, 98-yard drive to send that one to overtime. And UCF this last year, the elements weren't great there. He had a phenomenal game.
How
Texas
about
Tech,
TCU?
yeah, TCU.
TCU was unreal. That
with
was ridiculous.
with every bit of pressure on him and his father that day, he goes out and has the game of his life. And then he's had more since
Throws
then.
for 500 yards.
Yeah. Look at Texas Tech.
Great.
You fall
Yeah.
down early. You got tortillas being thrown at you to the point that you decide to autograph one, which was one of the awesome. That was one of the coolest moves ever. When he autographs that, but he leads the team to a victory that day in those elements. And I just think this is a guy. If I'm an NFL franchise, I know we're biased, Matt, because we covered him, but if I'm an NFL franchise and I'm looking at a quarterback, like, okay, this is a guy that he can handle the spotlight without question. He's been in it his entire life. Can he handle the NFL life? Well, he's known the NFL life his entire life, right? Can he handle this situation? Look at every element he's been. He's never been phased by taking over a good team. He's not, and I'm not trying to put down other players, but like, he's not a guy that was a 5-star that went to Alabama, went to Georgia, where those programs are already stocked, and it's just come in and keep the train rolling. It was, hey, son, come to Jackson State with me. We're not very good. So what does he do? He wins a couple SWAC titles. Son, we're going to go to Colorado. They're coming off 1-11. They're the worst team in the country. Cool. Let's go up there. 2 years later, they're almost winning. They're almost in the Big 12 title game. So if I'm an NFL franchise and I'm looking at all that stuff, I'm like, yep, that's a guy I want. He's not going to be phased by anything.
The biggest compliment I think that you could possibly give him is what former Oregon State head coach Gary Anderson did after the Alamo Bowl when he came, and he's a defensive analyst for BYU now, and he came out and he told the BYU media after the game that in the first half alone, they threw 17 different looks at Shedeur and only repeated 3. That's unheard of for a college quarterback. First of all, to even be able to execute that is ridiculous and only happens for like a bowl game or the first game of the year because there's just no way you'd have enough time to get all that done. So first of all, incredibly impressive by BYU. Number 2, the amount of respect you have to allocate that much of your practice time to building your game plan like that for the opposing quarterback.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's as big of a compliment as you could possibly give somebody. So I would just say that it's his football IQ, it's his poise, it's his savvy. He never blinks. He never gets sped up. He doesn't get nervous. He's seen it all. He's been in those big moments where everything's literally been on his shoulders.
Yeah.
At 2 a.m. on the East Coast, Shedeur Sanders is pulling 10 plus million viewers. Okay. Like that's, and not to mention the eyeballs and the attention and the notoriety and the boost to season tickets and the economic impacts that type of attention we know brings to an organization.
Right.
Don't think for a second Shedeur Sanders won't be A block. Don't think for a second Monday night, Sunday night football, week 1 or 2. Guess who's going to be on it if he's starting? Okay, like if he goes to a team where he's projected to start, guess who
Hmm.
will be there? Later in the season, if he's not supposed to start early, guess who's going to have late in the season primetime games? The
Yeah.
NFL knows that he's going to be a cash cow. It's in the NFL's best interest to actually help get him to a good situation. It
Right.
really is.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as the character stuff, real quick before we move on to other people, I tweeted this out today, and I've defended him so much. I've been on radio shows in Pittsburgh and Cleveland, things like that, and they asked me about his character things and all those things. Every teammate I've ever talked to, on and off the record, has raved about this guy as a teammate. I've seen it. I've said this. I've told this story before, but I got a chance to go in the locker room after their Celebration Bowl at Jackson State, their loss to North Carolina Central, I think it was, and it was Shedeur rallying those guys in the locker room. He was a sophomore, Matt. He's the leader, and I can't imagine him not being well liked unless there's some, veterans that are 10, 12 years older than him that are maybe jealous, but I can't imagine him not being well liked. I've told people wherever he goes, the media, you're going to like him. He's engaging
Love
with the
him.
media. And yeah, there's always going to be somebody that doesn't like him. For the most part, he's going to be engaging with the media. He's going to stand up there after a loss. He's going to answer every one of your questions, and he's going to be an engaging guy. He's going to be engaging in the community. The community where he goes is going to love him because he's going to roll up to a school every now and then. And, he's going to do community things because he loves being around kids and loves doing stuff like that. So I think wherever he goes, they're going to love him. And to me, Matt, all this character stuff, by September, nobody's going to talk about it because it's like, oh, yeah, we love Shedeur.
Well, I'm sure people are going to talk about it because I think it's becoming pretty apparent to me this is going to follow him. This type of attention and this type of divisiveness, it's going to follow him. You're going to have people that are actively rooting against him. I don't
Yeah.
think it's really going away. It'll change. It'll change because
I shouldn't
he's
say
going to have
going
to
away.
prove.
It'll
Yeah,
lessen.
no, yeah. Maybe. I mean, NFL fans are ruthless, so I'm not exactly sure how it's all going to look. If I had to project, honestly, I think it's going to get worse. But probably not to this level because the individual spotlight will be on him less after the draft. That is for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, only because the NFL has so many different storylines every single year. But
Right.
he will be a much. How many people would rather tune in to watch Caleb Williams with the Bears as opposed to Shedeur Sanders with pick a team? You know what
Right.
I mean? Like there is the star factor that comes with
Right.
him,
Hmm.
and that will attract attention, both positive and negative. And yeah, I mean, you talk about him as a teammate. He's the same person after a win or after a loss. There are so many different times over the last 2 years where he would have been justified to go, hey man, what the hell am I supposed to do out there? You see these guys that are blocking for me? I am running for my life. And
Yeah.
nobody would have really been able to say a word about it because
Yeah.
he would have been dead on. But he never
Although
did.
the
Never did.
one time he mildly did that after Nebraska, they jumped all over him like he's throwing his teammates under the bus. You and I were in that press conference. Did you feel he was throwing his teammates under the bus?
No, and the
No.
reason nobody followed up on it is because we all knew what he meant. He's like,
Right.
he was just being real. He was
Right.
just like, hey, look, I mean, it's a work in progress. I can't remember
Right.
what the exact verbatim was, but it was essentially, he's like, you guys see what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Well,
He was
he's
basically
right.
saying, Raiola. Was Raiola running for his life? He was right. He played for a poor offensive line, and it was a little bit better this last year, but it was not a good offensive line. You and I are both Shedeur fans. I'm curious to see where he goes. I frankly hope he goes to Pittsburgh. I would love to see him go to an organization that is going to, put him in a good spot because I'd love to see Shedeur finally go in a place that is a little more set up for him than what he's been in.
So here's my only concern with that. And, you know, after covering the NFL for a while and really getting nuts and bolts doing talk radio every single day in a major market, quarterback is a little different. If you're drafted outside the top 10, Brian, there is a very low statistical percentage that you actually end up working out. We're just talking about numbers. And obviously, I'm not applying this to Shedeur and just to mean that if he were to slide, he's not going to pan out. What it means,
Yeah,
though, is that on a higher likelihood, an NFL team will not surround you with as many resources or give you as much time as a team would had you been drafted in the top 10. That's a statistical fact. And there's, I mean, so big of a sample size, especially since the rookie wage scale was implemented in 2011, of that being the case. And I remember the reason I know about all this is because I did a huge deep dive on Bo Nix and, the Broncos going through and doing this quarterback limbo, for the
yeah,
last like 4 years. So what I'll say is, while I'm with you in that it would be a better situation, you saw what happened to Kenny Pickett, who went in the 20s, who got like a year and a half. And if it doesn't click right away, teams really aren't that invested in you because they'll
yeah,
hedge their bets just a little bit. The truth is if you love a quarterback, you go draft him no matter what, which is why I truly believe that he will go off the board within the first 10 picks. And
yeah.
if I'm wrong on that, I'm wrong. I almost wanted to get on here and make a tattoo bet that he wouldn't fall out of the first round, and I'm almost willing to do that because, like, it would be so beyond me to watch
Don't
that
do a bet.
happen. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it, and it's
Yeah,
not because I don't believe it. I'm so confident that I'd be happy to do it. Honestly,
yeah,
get in the comments. We'll pick, haters. Show. We'll pick a fight. The point was, that's how confident I am because
yeah.
you don't turn that down.
Yes,
Some team will say yes to that.
I just think though if he falls, he's gonna him being in the 20s is way different than a normal quarterback being in the 20s. I think if he falls, it's because of a lot of these factors we're talking about that are, I think they're manufactured in a lot of ways, and so we'll see. But we've also seen some quarterbacks that two of the biggest falls I remember in recent memory, Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson. If Shedeur falls, I feel confident he'll be in that category more so
Yes.
than Brady Quinn, who
I
fell.
would agree. Yeah, no,
You
no.
know,
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. Trust me. I'm not saying if he falls, he's done. I'm
oh,
not,
I know
or
you're
he's not
not.
going to
I'm just
work
saying,
out. Well, some fans are going to hear that, so I just need to
yeah,
clarify that.
I
What I'm
just think
trying to
that,
tell you
yeah,
is that you have a much better likelihood of being surrounded, being given what you need to succeed early on if you're
yeah,
drafted a little bit higher, and it's just by statistical percentage. Now, you could fall into a great situation. Mahomes wasn't in the top 10. You know what I mean? Like you could
right,
fall into a great situation and end up with a better team. It's certainly a very real possibility when you're
yeah,
a guy who can handle it. So,
yeah.
look, buddy, you and I are pulling for him as much as anybody out there, and I can't wait to see where he goes.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun tomorrow night. Let's move on real quick. There's really not a whole lot to say about Travis Hunter because um, there's not a lot of talk about him other than what position does he play. There's compared to Shedeur, there's been almost no talk about Travis Hunter because it seems pretty much a lock. I think almost everybody universally believes Cam Ward will be number one. And as I'm looking through mock drafts today, it's almost universal. Travis Hunter is going to be number two to Cleveland. Um, you see some that maybe they go Abdul Carter and Travis is three to the Giants. I think this was more 2 weeks ago. You saw some that maybe had him four to New England, but I've never seen anybody have him below four. The bottom line is it looks like he's going to be a Cleveland Brown, right?
Can you imagine if Travis Hunter went below four? Like, I mean, you're talking about four GMs that are going to be gone within the next 5 to
Listen
ten
to me.
years is a guarantee for me.
If Travis Hunter falls below four, then everything that they say, hey, they just hate Deion Sanders. Yep, I believe you on that
Honestly,
because
below three, unless
yeah,
Shador gets picked. If he
yeah,
falls below three, it would be insane.
I think and Dion, obviously, or Coach Prime has said recently that look, he believes Shedeur and Travis are the two most NFL ready guys in the draft. I believe him, but when it's Travis Hunter, it's like, come on, man. I mean, do you want a corner? Do you want a receiver? You want both? And I don't know. To me, there's not a whole lot to say about Travis. He's a slam dunk. Like, I'm so excited to see what he does, and um, Cleveland, New York. I don't really care. I'm excited to see what he does. He's gonna be fun to watch.
He is the most gifted pro prospect in any sport I've ever seen with my own eyes. It's not a question of if he will work out, it's just a question of to what degree. I
Yeah,
believe he's going to be the first true two-way superstar the modern NFL has really ever seen. He is so supremely gifted in every aspect. He's such a smart young man. He gets it too. Even if he doesn't love to play the media game, he knows how to do it, and he'll have enough in his bag to take care of that. That was my one tiny little concern at the beginning because he just doesn't love to do it. It's you are grilled in the NFL
yeah,
with media, especially if you're a star. You are asked to do a lot of different appearances, and I think that for Travis, he's gotten a lot better at it as he's gotten a little bit older now and come out more and more out of his shell. He's great in every interview he does
yeah,
now, and so I just we've said this before. Even Tennessee with Cam Ward, even if Cam Ward goes number one overall, hits and becomes a great player,
yeah,
Tennessee in the back of their mind is still going to have to watch Red Zone on their bye weeks and hear Scott Hansen go, "We got an update from the Giants game. It's Travis
yeah,
Hunter." You know what
yeah.
I mean? Because that's
Right.
what's I can already see that happening. The cutaways on Red Zone to Travis touchdowns or interceptions. This is a can't miss player. It's a can't miss person. And you want to talk about rooting for somebody? I mean, same boat as Shedeur. I mean, I am rooting for Travis Hunter so hard it's silly.
Yeah. I will say this. You asked a question to Pat Shermer at the Alamo Bowl, about potentially a team getting both these guys. As you look at the projections about Shedeur and everything, I'm looking at it saying, well, if Cleveland gets Travis at 2 and Shedeur does slip out and Cleveland grabs him with the first pick of the second round, watch out, NFL, because I would love to see those. I mean, that's the only reason I want to see Shedeur, not want to see it. But if he slips out and goes to Cleveland there, that'd be pretty cool.
That'd be amazing. Those two have such a unique and special connection.
Yeah.
There's a reason why when everybody else would have thought it was stupid to ask that question, I asked that question
Yeah.
to Pat Shermer, a former NFL head coach. And I
Right.
told him, I go, hey, look, I think this probably a lot of people are going to hear this and think it's fantasy football. But after watching what I've watched, after watching those two in the huddle,
Yeah.
that is copy and paste to the NFL. Like
Right.
it that translates, And so for me, I think that, I mean, for all of us, I think that would be absolutely incredible. And yes, it would certainly be the long way around to get
Yeah.
there to watch him have to slip. But I think if that happened at the end of the day, I think we'd all be pretty fired up. Maybe I'll move to Cleveland, cover the Browns.
Well, and I want to add too, I don't think either one of them needs the other one to succeed in the NFL. It
No,
would just be
no,
a
no,
lot of fun to
no.
watch. I think Travis is going to have a nice rapport with whoever his quarterback is. Shador's going to have a nice rapport and work like crazy with whoever his receivers are. So, yeah, let's move
Travis
on.
Travis
Yeah,
looked great with Ryan Staub in the one game that he played at CU without Shedeur.
there's a perfect example right there.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Those are the only two buffs that are locks to get drafted. There's a lot of other guys that um, pretty much everybody else in this draft, their draft projection is maybe seventh round, but most likely undrafted free agent. So let's just blanket go to everybody else and say, and I'll just ask you, Matt, if there's a third, fourth, or fifth buff drafted. Well, let me start with this. Will there be a third buff drafted?
Yeah, Jimmy's going to get drafted.
You think Jimmy would be the first one?
I do. I do.
Okay. Why is that?
Because I think his speed is very elite, and that is an
Uh-huh.
elite NFL skill. There's a lot of guys who kind of go into the NFL as a slighter player, as kind of like water bug guys and flash out. But I don't think Jimmy's that light. Like he's a little bit more solid than you think for a guy his size, and I just think he has skills that can translate. Now, I also believe it's partially because speed is one of the hottest commodities in the NFL. I'm right now looking up on NFL mock draft database the others, as I would call it right now. They've got Jimmy, and mock draft database scans the entire internet and scours all mock drafts and puts together a consensus. And a consensus on LeJontay, they've got him consensus as an undrafted. For Jimmy, they've got him a consensus undrafted, but it doesn't mean they will. And there's certainly mock drafts with those guys going off the board in the 6th and the 7th round. But what it
Mhm.
says is the consensus and the total of all mock drafts that they survey have these guys as undrafted, and Will Shepard is as well. So that is interesting. That's the first time I've actually done that. Now, all these websites have all three of those guys as 6th to 7th round picks. I think there's a chance Will Shepard could actually jump up and be a surprise too because of his NFL skill set with his big body and athleticism.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I haven't seen anybody buzz about BJ Green. And the other part of being a late draft pick, you have to understand, is a lot of teams know who is going to go off the board before and after them and who's interested sometimes in certain different players. And, you know, if there's a little bit of buzz, you would have heard it by now, I think, on a guy like a BJ Green
Yeah.
or even a Cam or even a Shiloh. I haven't seen any of those guys. In fact, I stopped short of looking everybody up, but I think the reason I stopped is because if Jimmy, LeJohntay, and Will are all supposed to be UDFA's mock draft database, I'm guessing that those other guys are not
Yeah.
projected to be drafted either.
Let me ask you this though, because I understand what you're saying on Jimmy. I view LeJohntay in sort of the same way. I know his 40 was a tenth of a second slower than Jimmy, but isn't LeJohntay the same type of player, but he's got the production that Jimmy didn't have? I mean, to me, I rank LeJohntay ahead of Jimmy because
Yeah, I hear
LeJohntay's
you.
done it more than Jimmy has, and Jimmy had the injuries this last year, but he also, and I love Jimmy's talent. He's a great young man, and I think he could be a good pro. But in the 2 years we watched him, um, Jimmy would disappear a lot of times. I mean, he would go weeks without doing
Sure.
much, and LeJohntay never really did. I mean, LeJohntay was there every single week, and um, you know, I think we saw it last year. Again, Jimmy was hurt the second half of the year, but even when he was healthy, Shedeur seemed to trust LeJohntay more than Jimmy at times. And, um, you know, outside of 2023, he had the big game against CSU. I think it was CSU. And outside of that, I don't remember him having a whole lot of big games. So I look at LeJohntay like they're sort of similar, but I would rate LeJohntay. And everything I'm looking at, I agree with you. I'm seeing Jimmy rated ahead. I would rate LeJohntay ahead of Jimmy.
I think there's a chance LeJohntay could be a more productive player, but you have to understand both of those guys are going to be facing an uphill battle to even make a team.
Right.
Okay, like or even make a practice squad is the truth. I mean, there's a lot of Jimmys and LeJohntay's at this level. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just the truth, especially the wide receiver position. There's so much talent that's just on the street, not in the NFL. You've got to
Right.
be better than all those guys,
Mhm.
and part of it is a lot of guys are good possession receivers who are just bigger and faster than LeJohntay. That's just
Yeah.
kind of like, natural selection at that point. And
Yep.
I think when we're talking about projecting, unless LeJohntay is going to be a punt return guy in the NFL, he's not fast enough, I don't think, to do that though. And I think Jimmy could be. So that's where I would give Jimmy the edge is making a roster, which I think is going to be really hard for him to do. But I think there's a possibility because I believe in him
Yeah.
that he gets more through special teams than LeJohntay would. Because, like I said, I mean, there's a bunch of those guys. Like, I think of a guy like a Montrell Washington who played at Samford. It was a very small school who the Broncos drafted in the 5th round 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
He just proved to be too small at the end of the day. And I'm a little bit nervous that that might happen with LeJohntay because he is slight. So, and I don't know how much weight there is to put on him. Like, I think you
Yeah.
could get a little bit more weight on Jimmy. I don't
Right.
know how much on LeJohntay. So again, he's a dog, and I'm pulling for him. But there are a locker room full of them in
Yeah.
32 different teams. So you've got to be that good. And could they make a practice squad? Sure, I could see it, but
Yeah.
we'll see, Brian. I mean, I'm pretty surprised
Well,
looking at this mock draft database right now that none of the three are projected to go off the board. That's fascinating to me.
yeah, it's interesting too. I always remember, I remember talking to some scouts in 2014 when P. Rich was drafted, and we all watched, and we're biased. We think P. Rich is a first round talent, and he was a first round talent. But I remember this scout telling me the thing about receiver is he goes, there's every year there's an abundance of receivers and there's an abundance of corners. And so if you're
Yeah,
at those positions, you better stand out in some way,
100%.
and maybe that's where Jimmy stands out. Maybe it's the special teams aspect for LeJohntay. I don't know. To me, I think if there's a third buff drafted though, I would I'd go with LeJohntay.
Okay.
You go with Jimmy. Is there a fourth?
I think Will has a good chance of getting drafted too, especially late. Like he's got all
Yeah.
the ball skills. He was unbelievably productive. His production only tailed off last year because he went to a different school and became what, the third option in the offense. At the end of the day, would you say Will was the third option
Yeah. Yeah.
behind
Behind
Travis and
Travis and
LeJohntay?
LeJohntay. Yeah. Because and a
Yeah,
lot of it was because Jimmy was hurt a lot, but
sure. Well,
the
what's
funny
it?
thing is he's the third option
Yeah.
and his numbers were almost the same as when he was the first option at Vanderbilt.
Right. And what's interesting is if you go back and you look at mock drafts in the fall of last year, there were some, places that were looking at him as even a second or a third round, maybe even a fourth round guy I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And now this year it's all seventh and sixth. So I think he's actually got he might have the best chance of all of them, all the others to get drafted, maybe over Jimmy. Although I
Yeah.
still think at least one of those guys goes off the board. I'd be pretty
Yeah.
surprised if at least one didn't.
You're actually probably right on Will having the better shot because he is that bigger body possession receiver. He's not quite as fast, but he's got speed. I think of guys like, every year there's not every year, but throughout the history, there's been some guys that you thought, oh, that guy got drafted. Like I remember Juwan Winfrey getting drafted by the Broncos, and that surprised me. I didn't think any busts would get drafted, and Winfrey gets drafted. Jordan Carroll got drafted by the Cowboys in the seventh round one year. Arlington Hambright gets drafted. So there's some
Yeah.
guys that
God, what a name.
yeah, that you think, yeah, I didn't see that guy getting drafted, but it's about whether that team falls in love with you. And the funny thing about the draft, Matt, and you and I are not saying these guys can't play in the NFL. We're
Not at
trying to
all.
project what's going to
No,
happen with
no,
them.
no.
Is you look at the draft every year, and when you get to the fifth, sixth, seventh round, a lot of times there's guys drafted, and you're like, never heard of that guy, and never heard of that school. The NFL will find some guy that was um, a slot receiver, kick returner, did this and that for some Division III school that they fell in love with, and so that's what's gonna. There's going to be guys drafted, I guarantee you, like at receiver or at safety, where people are going to say, "How did that guy get drafted ahead of Cameron Summer Craig?"
Yeah,
How
yeah.
did that guy get drafted ahead of Jimmy Horn?
Hmm.
So that's what's going to happen. But so let me have your number. How many buffs get drafted total?
I'll go five.
Five. Okay.
I'll go all of them go. I'll
All
go
three
all five.
receivers go. Okay.
All four receivers, Brian.
Well, yeah, Travis. That's yeah. He's
I'll
a
say all of them go. That's my
interesting.
official
Okay.
prediction.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
because I think they're
Interesting.
all draftable players.
I do
I
think
mean,
they're all draftable.
they're
Yeah.
all incredibly productive,
Yeah.
and I think they're all very popular as well. And
Yeah.
I think that helps, especially the back end of the draft. I really
Right.
do.
Yeah.
So, especially because not only Jimmy, but all three of those guys have proven that they can do it in multiple places. Like Jimmy was
Yeah.
successful at USF too, right? I mean, he had some plays there, but obviously Zay was the guy, But you look at LeJohntay, look at what he did at FAU and Will at Vanderbilt. They're
Yeah.
established players. They're older guys who I think could all step in and compete in a training camp. You just got to be a dog, and
And
it's going to be an
yeah,
uphill battle for them.
I'll say this too. Wherever Shedeur is drafted,
Pretty good chance.
I would look
Yeah,
at that team late in the draft taking one of those guys.
I think that's a pretty safe bet. I think it's a
So,
pretty safe
you know,
bet.
because if you've got your quarterback and he says, I'd really love you to get Jimmy Horn in the seventh round, then Jimmy could get
Yeah,
drafted. But I mean, I honestly think, I think Cam is draftable. I think BJ Green is draftable. If I'm an NFL team, I would want it. I would give Chidozie Nwankwo a chance. I don't know if he's draftable, but these are
for
guys that,
sure.
you look at and say, yeah, um, I think
He's a
another,
guy I could see getting drafted, Bry.
yeah,
He's a guy I could see. Wonkwo is a guy that I could see a team falling in love with and drafting him later. I absolutely could see that.
yeah. And the other sort of polarizing guy late is Shiloh. That, you know, I think he's a borderline draft pick. I think he's going to get a shot, but is that a guy too that instead of undrafted free agent, does a team take him late because they like him as a player, but also maybe because he's Deion's son?
That and depth at safety. Like there's
Yeah,
not safety is one of the lesser deep positions in the draft. I was looking to see if any big mocks had Shiloh going out. Looks like USA Today put out one on April 6th that had him as a seventh round pick to the Chiefs. So, hey man, I'm pulling for Shiloh. I'll tell you this. Shiloh's hungry. Like
yeah,
that was one thing that I could really pick up on is, he's definitely been overlooked in the situation by a lot of people, and you know, I once said that to Coach Prime, and he's like, not by the opposing coach. And it was just
yeah,
more like by the national conversation. And I think that was actually at the end of the 2023 season
yeah,
that I said that. But, we're talking about incredibly productive players, great leaders, excellent young men. All these guys I really enjoyed covering. After Pro Day, I went up and I shook Jimmy's hand and, told him that, we were all going to support him and are proud of him and, happy to see what he's going to go on to do. And everybody's pulling for him. Same with Will and LeJonte. And, on a personal level, we're pulling for everybody. So I don't want to say one thing that's going to upset some people and think that we don't think they can do it because
yeah,
we've watched it.
yeah,
So
uh,
I hope the best. I believe all those other guys should be in camps.
yeah.
Like I don't see anybody really missing out on a camp
The other one I'll say, and I went up to this guy at Pro Day too, Cam Silman Craig, and
for
I
sure.
went up to him, I chatted with him for a few minutes, and just off the record, and he reminds me so much. I think I've said it on this podcast before, but he reminds me so much of Philip Lindsay,
Oh yeah,
and that obviously Philip was a running back, Cam's a safety, but guys that are highly productive, just emotional guys. They're leaders, and they're going to get overlooked in the draft because of their size. Philip Lindsay was not the prototypical running back, so he doesn't get drafted. And what happens? He signs with the Broncos, makes the
but
Pro
he was
Bowl.
a dog.
Absolute dog,
Dog.
absolute
I
dog. And
mean,
I,
yeah.
I think when I look at a Philip, and if Cam does not get drafted, you know, I think NFL teams need to start looking more at the dog factor because, Phil Lindsay was an absolute dog and rushes for 1,000 yards his first 2 years, makes the Pro Bowl as a rookie. To me, that's Cam Summan Craig. And, whatever I always said with Philip Lindsay, whether he gets drafted or not, I said this before the draft, whether he gets drafted or not, he's going to get a shot and he will make the roster of whatever team he goes to. I feel the same way about Cam Summan Craig. I think whether he gets drafted or not, and I told him this. I said, whether you get drafted or not, you're going to make the roster wherever you go. And he smiles and he goes, "Yeah, but I want to hear my name called." And I'm like, "Yes, I know. They all want to hear their name called." I hope he does, but I'm going right now. I guarantee you, Cam Simon Craig makes the roster of wherever he signs.
Makes the opening 53.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
you heard it here first, folks.
yeah. Because I think if he gets drafted, it's a team that sees all of that and loves him. And if he doesn't, he's going to go somewhere where he's got that shot to do it. And I'll just say right now, I think Cam Silva Craig, if of all the other guys, take out Shedeur and Travis, of all the other guys, if I had to bet on one making it, it would be Cam Silva Craig.
Right on. I mean, I love Cam.
So
I love Cam. He's got his work cut out for him, though. He definitely does. I mean,
yeah,
as good of a player he is, a phone call from Coach Prime as an undrafted guy certainly goes a long way, and I'm sure he'll be in a camp.
yeah.
He's just got his work cut out for him because, I mean, you're talking about absolute
Well,
thoroughbreds in
but
the
they all
NFL.
do. I
I
mean,
mean,
when you're talking about late
you
round
know,
picks, they all got their work cut out for them. And I think
100%. No, 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 100%.
I know you know
100%.
that, but
Yeah.
you talk about like Shiloh having the want to factor. Cam has that too, and
Yes.
this is no disrespect to Shiloh, but Cam's got the dog factor more so than Shiloh does, and I think Shiloh would say that, but because everybody on the team said that last year that Cam is just that guy, and
I agree. He's
I've
an awesome player. I love him.
I've talked to him a couple times, and he's just been overlooked. I mean, even when he got to CU, he doesn't earn a starting job out of camp in 2023. Miles Slusher earns the job, gets hurt in week one, and we never heard of Miles Slusher again because Cam Silva Craig took over the spot, was great. Slusher was hurt a little bit and then transferred out. And so,
For
um,
sure.
yeah, I just believe wholeheartedly in Cam Silva Craig. And I think BJ Green's going to, be a guy that can be productive in the NFL. Chidozie is a guy that, yeah, he could be a run stuffer too. So,
And Shane. I'll throw Shane
and
in there.
Shane, yeah. So there's some guys. I mean, I'm going to settle on, I think there's probably 3 to 4 guys that get drafted. I think there's several guys. I think the bigger news out of the Buffs is going to come after the draft. There's going to be a lot of guys that are signed.
And we can all be relieved that this is soon going to be over and we don't have to hear the draft takes because they're not going to matter, and we can just start to talk about season projections because
Yeah.
as soon as Shedeur goes to whatever team it's on, they're going to be horrible. They're
Yeah.
going to be horrible. I mean, up,
Yeah.
2 and 14, 2 and 30, 15, that's what it's going to be. Yeah, it's not. We're going to hear that, but at the same time, I'm just looking forward to watching those guys play and continuing their careers because they were all extremely, extremely fun to cover. Very kind young men, very upstanding representatives of the university, and certainly changed things for the better. And we're rooting for every last one of them, no
Yeah.
question.
It's gonna be fun. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night to see. I'm really hoping that we don't have to watch the first few picks of the second round on Tuesday to find out, or on Tuesday, on Friday,
Yeah,
because I think Shador will be gone by then, but we'll see.
I again, maybe a temporary tattoo bet right here. I'll put Shador's logo on my head for like 3 days if that happened. How's
Well,
that sound?
I ain't doing that, but go ahead.
All
We'll
right.
see y'all
Thanks for
later.
watching, guys.
Bye.